It's a time of flux at the State House, and my next guest is one of the biggest beneficiaries. Stan Rosenberg was just sworn in as president of the Massachusetts Senate last month, making him one of the three most powerful individuals on Beacon Hill. And he's already making some sweeping changes in the way the Senate does business. Senator Rosenberg joins me now. Senator, thank you for being here. I should say
pleasure.
Senate President. Thank you for being here.
Happy to be here.
So the big news on Beacon Hill this week was Governor Baker's plan for closing the $750 million budget gap that he inherited from the Patrick administration. What do you make of the approach he's planning to take?
Well, a portion of it he has total control over, the 9C cuts. A portion of it he needs permission from the legislature, and part of what he needs permission from us to do relates to some revenue pieces, most notably a proposal to not put the excess capital gains tax into the rainy day fund, but use that one-time money to close the one-time deficit.
And ordinarily, just for listeners or viewers who might not know exactly what you're talking about, usually the capital gains tax does go directly into the rainy day fund.
Everything above $1 billion.
Okay.
Goes into the rainy day fund.
And 9C cuts, what is a layperson's term for those?
The budget cuts that the governor can do unilaterally without permission of the legislature in order to bring the budget into balance. And then there's a number of cuts that he wants to make in agencies that cannot be cut without permission of the legislature.
So what are some of those?
And so some of those would be the legislature itself, the courts, the constitutional officers, some of those kinds of offices. And so he has some modest proposals relating to cuts in those agencies on the table.
And that sort of collective vision that he's outlined for closing this gap, do you like what you've heard?
It heads in the right direction. It's a tough thing to do 7 months into the fiscal year to close a $768 million deficit. But I think he's put some decent proposals on the table. We're reviewing them now. We need to make decisions quickly because every day this goes on, the deeper the cuts will have to be. The state Democratic Party took aim at Baker for basically, as they cast it, showing that he doesn't see people, he just sees numbers as he looks to craft these cuts. Let's take a look at what Matt Fenlon, the executive director of the Mass Democratic Party, had to say. Governor Baker's only 1 month into his administration, yet again he's broken another promise to voters. During the campaign, Governor Baker called himself a weed whacker, and he's already showing disregard for the people behind every line item he cuts. Is that fair? Well, the deficit has to be closed, and most programs are there to serve people. So it's a little bit of a political dance going on there.
Does this huge $750 million budget gap reflect badly at all on former Governor Deval Patrick?
We were quite surprised at the size of it. Some of it could have been anticipated and wasn't in the budget setting process, but there have been some problems in terms of the healthcare system in particular, the implementation of the federal Accountable Care Act, which interestingly...
Affordable Care Act,
Affordable Care Act, which interestingly is a substitute for a system that was already working in Massachusetts. It was built on our system, and we had to turn it upside down in order to comply with federal law. And that was such a shame because it's costing a lot of money, and there were missteps around getting the website up and the connector and all of those pieces, which unfortunately we should have been receiving a waiver from the federal government because the system is working. There was no need to change it. It was expensive. And that's the biggest piece of what's driving the deficit.
Is that something you and your colleagues talk about a lot? I was sort of surprised just then. Yeah, the frustration.
We're frustrated about that. And, local government says, oh, the state government doesn't know what it's doing and it hurts us. Well, we say the same thing about the federal government. They give lots of mandates. They tie our hands. They make laws and rules that don't reflect the reality of what we're dealing with here in the state. And especially something like this, where we're the only state in the country that implemented this system, and they built the federal system largely on it, and they still made us change the whole system to comply with their rules.
Is that, in a way, a consequence of having a liberal Democrat or a Democrat who's ambitious when it comes to public policy in the presidency? Because, I mean, when there's a Republican president, you have a lot more respect for states as the laboratory of democracy. I think that was Mitt Romney's catchphrase the last time he ran. Well, do you think that that's a downside to having a Democrat in the White House?
So that may be one way to look at it, but the other way to look at it is when you're forming law, you want to bring the people who are going to be impacted by the law to the table and listen to what they have to say. And if they had listened to Massachusetts and other states that were working on some of these things, they would have crafted it very differently. But we didn't have a seat at the table, and they weren't listening to our congressional delegation, which was saying, Massachusetts is already doing this well. Don't turn it upside down.
Let me switch gears and ask you about the Olympics. We've been talking about it earlier in the show. The first meeting in the city of Boston is tonight at Suffolk Law School at 6:30, I believe. You have said that if Boston ends up hosting the summer 2024 games, that you want it to be a statewide endeavor. Realistically, what could your constituents hope to see out of a Boston Summer Olympics?
Well, there are venues and opportunities across the Commonwealth. We have mountains in some places. We have rivers. We have lakes. So we could have a variety of things going on in different parts of the Commonwealth.
You have some nice sports facilities in Amherst.
We have
right?
some nice, exactly, and Lowell has some nice facilities. We have some stuff down in southeastern Mass. So the idea is to see if we can get some portion of it outside of the metropolitan Boston area.
Given that vision, what do you think of the idea of a statewide vote? As you know, there are some opponents who are already mobilizing to put it on the ballot. Do you think a statewide vote would be appropriate?
Lots of people are going to have lots of opinions about how we do this. We need transparency. We need the public's opinions. And the governor, the speaker, and I have been discussing, and I think soon will communicate to the public some ideas about how we want to make sure that the planning for this involves the public and how we ensure that there's no public funds necessary to subsidize the operating budget or to close a deficit should a deficit occur.
So given what you just said, what I'm guessing is that we're going to hear a proposal for meetings around the state, but maybe not a proposal for a statewide referendum. All right, will do.
Stay tuned.
A few more questions for you. Let's talk about some of the changes that you've made in the way the Senate operates. Bills will now be, there will be a 48-hour delay, right, between the time a bill comes out of committee and the time it goes to a vote. All votes will be posted online. What's some other stuff that you're changing?
So we also changed some of how we've organized the leadership of the Senate so that the members of leadership also have portfolios so that they have day-to-day hands-on work, not only in terms of committee, but also in working with the rest of the members. We're going to be empowering the Senate Steering and Policy Committee to do the work that is written in paper but hasn't yet been actualized, of working with all of the committee chairs to ensure that they are participating in helping to set the priorities and the agenda for the Senate. We've also just recently, that is yesterday, started a Commonwealth Conversations tour where we're bringing senators to each region of the state. And yesterday, 20% of the Senate showed up in Western Massachusetts and participated in a day-long set of activities, 2 forums, one at the beginning of the day and one at the end of the day, doing nothing but listening to the public. 300 people at those 2 forums were present in order to give us input on what they think the priorities, opportunities, and needs of the Commonwealth are. And then in between, we had some stops at businesses and effective publicly funded programs.
What kind of comments did you hear from constituents?
A lot about their enthusiasm for transparency, a lot about their enthusiasm for inclusion in the process of developing the agenda. We also heard a lot about the economy, about jobs, about opportunity. We heard some about tax policy and tax equity, and we heard a lot about specific pieces of legislation that people hope will be considered that will move the Commonwealth forward.
On the transportation front, as you know, the T had a pretty bad week this week. A lot of things didn't work the way they were supposed to. There's a perception out there that one reason that the T hasn't received the investment that it needs and the funding it needs is that people in your part of the state and other parts of the state that don't directly benefit from it frequently aren't interested in investing in it. And the legislators who represent those...
Absolutely wrong. Absolutely
Tell me why.
Wrong. Well, because the major policy that we've done in the last 15 years to support the T was to earmark a penny on the sales tax for the T, and we've provided other forms of investment which required the votes of all of the legislators, and the majority of the legislators live outside of metropolitan Boston area. And so what we look for is equity. We're looking for regional transportation so that we can have public transportation in our areas as well. We look for fair handling when it comes to allocating road and bridge money and major infrastructure projects. And you know, the Big Dig, everybody in the Commonwealth has been paying for the Big Dig for decades now. And for a long period of time, in the middle of that whole process, virtually no money was going outside of the Big Dig to the rest of the Commonwealth. So, you know, we pay taxes everywhere in the Commonwealth. We deserve to participate in the programs and have access and support. So we're not against the T. We're for everybody having access to public transportation and a fair means of paying for that.
I feel like a cat asking this after what you just said, but with all that being said, what do you think should be done in the next few years to make the Boston area T not have meltdowns like the one it had this week?
It's the oldest system in the country. We have to continue to look at efficiencies. Over time, we've seen that certain cost centers in the T are out of line with national norms for other large-scale old systems across the country. And we have to fit it into our transportation planning. And Governor Patrick tried mightily to get a major investment in transportation. The people want better and more efficient and effective transportation than they're actually willing to pay for. Witness to the repeal of the indexing of the gas tax, which was part of a plan. Now, I know there was a philosophical question about should we vote on taxes every year on gas tax or whatever. But the bottom line is we had a package of revenue for transportation which was substantially less than what the governor and an independent commission said we needed for the future of our Commonwealth and its economy. And we had only a fraction of it, and about half of it got lost in the repeal of the software tax and the indexing on the gas tax. Half is an exaggeration, but the point is a substantial amount was lost.
Right.
So we have to get back to the table and talk about transportation financing.
You think Governor Baker would like to do that? Does he share that vision?
I will let him speak for himself, but he knows how important transportation is. He's said that before publicly.
One more question for you briefly. We had your majority leader, Harriet Chandler, on here last night talking about a bill that she has filed that would lead to increased use of these lifts to take patients out of beds in hospitals so that nurses and nurses' aides don't suffer injuries at the rate they're currently suffering them. This is a bill that has been backed by the Mass Nurses Association, opposed by the Mass Hospital Association. Do you have any thoughts on this proposal?
So I respect the committee process, and I'll look forward to the recommendations of the committee. We obviously have to work always to try to protect workers' safety in all environments, and so let's have an open mind and an open discussion about what we need to do in this situation to ensure that patients are safely cared for and the nurses and the staff who have to work with them have the capacity to do so.
Senate President Stan Rosenberg, thank you for being here.
It's my pleasure.